Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this month's exciting budget meeting. We'll start off with item 1 on the agenda. Any apologies for absence?
Yes, I have apologies from councillors P. Buttercofer, S. Buttercofer, C. Hynink, C. Stockton, E. Vardy and L. Withington.
Thanks, Emma. Item 2 on the agenda is to receive declarations of interest, and just to clarify for those who haven't seen it, on page 6 is the new flow chart that was recently adopted from the LGA model councillor conduct. So do we have any declarations of interest? No. Good. Item 3 is items of urgent business. I don't believe we have any. Item 4 is Chairman's communications. I've not done anything exciting in the last fortnight, you'll be pleased to know, so I don't have any this month. And item 5, I'll move over to Councillor Adams for the leader's announcements.
Thank you, Jeremy. So next month it will be 2 years since our first called lockdown, our so-called lockdown, I should say. I therefore wanted to start today by reflecting on the achievements of those that rose to the challenge to support people in North Norfolk, both in our voluntary sector, but particularly the wonderful efforts of our own staff in that time. The flexibility and capability of staff to adapt was, of course, demonstrated more than ever before, with teams as diverse as property, environmental contracts, and even staff from partner organisations like Everyone Active, building up the COVID response and the locality hubs. Staff members from revenues and benefits, people services and housing options have, of course, harder than ever before, and that has continued since. We have certainly seen just how driven our economic development are, likely more contacts with individual businesses than this authority has ever seen. Lovely feedback from those businesses, of course, awards, and the sheer volume of work they have processed, which has continued to receive recognition. Despite all of this, the teams have continued to work towards our corporate plan priorities and have made various other achievements. So when you stand back and look at that and reflect on it all, it is really incredibly impressive. For every single one of our staff, the authority to keep moving in every role as we emerge from this crisis, you can reflect on this in many years to come and be proud, and we thank you for what you achieved. I have been in post 2 weeks today, and I've been absolutely delighted with the level of engagement I've seen with both staff and councillors, all taking the time to share with me their vision for the future of the council and the district. I've already had meetings with representatives of Sheringham, Bodham and Wells councils, various local members, businesses and environmental groups. And this is how I intend to go on in future. I look forward to visiting members in Stalham, Ludham, and I hope also Holt and Fakenham in the near future to do very much the same. In the short time I've been leader, we have seen coastal assets and property teams respond to some significant damage to council property and other assets, including over the last weekend with damage to various assets in Sheringham and Cromer following Storm Eunice. We have seen concerns raised over mass balloon and sky lantern releases from council property. Of course, this is already banned, and I thank members from across the chamber who have shared our social media posts, again drawing attention to that matter. Clearly, some of my time is now being taken up by the leader discussions on levelling up. And I think some of you have probably heard me jibe that this could be the nothing for North Norfolk blank paper. But in all seriousness, that's what we hope to avoid. And I'm hopeful councillors from across Norfolk can find a starting consensus soon from which we can move forward. But more important to residents in North Norfolk will be the rise in challenges, rising living costs. I've held discussions with both councillors and staff, and we will monitor the related demand on our services and help and consider additional resources to the voluntary sector if and when it is required. But whatever happens, NNDC will rise to that challenge if needed. That's what I wish to say. Thank you.
So Adams, thank you. Moving on to item 6, public questions and statements. I don't think we have any. No, lovely. Item 7, appointments to committees, subcommittees, work and Parties and panels. Oh, sorry, Councillor Perry Wards, apologies.
Please may I ask that we have the doors and the windows open? Thank you. What? What?
Right, lovely. Moving on. Item 7, appointments to committees, subcommittees. I'll just go around the group leaders first of all. Councillor Adams.
Yes, I do wish to announce that Lucy Shires will be joining the Constitution Working Party in place of Pauline Grove-Jones. And I also wish to propose the appointment of Adam Varley as chairman of the Constitution Working Party.
Okay, thank you for that. Do we need a second? Yeah, so do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Gay. Thank you. Councillor Gay is the outgoing chairman. Did you have anything you wish to say on that?
Just this is a very important committee, and I think that Adam is going to do a very good job for us, and it would be nice if more people were interested in the Constitution Working Party. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gay. So we have a proposer and a seconder. Do we have any alternatives? Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you for that. Moving on, Councillor Cushing, do you have any nominations? Councillor Rest?
No, Chairman, thank you.
Lovely, thank you everyone. Right, moving on to item 8. We're going to take this in separate chunks. So item 8A, first of all, I'll move to Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair. Addressing climate change is one of the most pressing problems threatening humankind and indeed many forms of life on this planet. Failure to limit our carbon emissions now will result in a much higher mitigation cost later, not to mention the personal suffering that is predicted to result from rising sea levels and ever more extreme weather events. This is why tackling climate change has become a strategic priority for many authorities across the UK and indeed for central government. Councils like our own will be key to reducing emissions nationally. We have important work to do in reducing our carbon footprint, but also in leading others. We want to take our residents with us on this journey. At NNDC, tackling climate change is now a corporate activity. It will require cooperation from all our departments and can only be achieved by embedding a whole council approach to tackling our carbon emissions. In our environmental charter, we set out our aspirations. We pledge to reduce our carbon footprint to net zero by 2030. We pledge to measure and publish our carbon footprint. We pledge to manage the carbon footprints of all our operational buildings and that of our contractors. The document before you sets out the pathway to decarbonise our activities at NNDC by 2030, whilst also outlining the challenges that exist for North Norfolk as a whole with regard to tackling climate change. It's an evidence-based document deliberately written in a way that our residents can understand. It sets out how much carbon we are emitting, where those emissions emanate, and it looks at how we might address those emissions. It outlines a glide path for this council to reach net carbon zero by 2030. Of course, since our climate emergency declaration in 2019, the first in Norfolk, we have already begun tackling our carbon footprint, and our progress is evidenced in the document. It was important to me that ONS committee were given early sight of this document before it went to cabinet, and I'd like to thank the chair of ONS for including it in an already busy agenda in January. I welcome the early ONS feedback, and I thank the committee for their positive contribution to the strategy. Their recommendations have been adopted. Staff workshops have been held, and I was grateful for so many senior managers and directors who attended. Member training has also occurred. It was pleasing to see so many members attend from all political persuasions. I'd like to thank Officer Annie Samaisi, Rob Young, Nigel Stannett for their work in bringing the Net Zero Action Plan before us today under the leadership of Director of Place and Climate Change, Martin Fulcher. Many more staff across a range of departments have also cooperated in its production, and Net Zero East, a climate change consultancy, number crunched much of the data and provided independent scientific expertise. They did a great job for us. I'm very happy to propose the adoption of this net zero strategy and action plan.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Before we move to discussions or questions, I just wondered if Councillor Dixon had anything to say from an overview and scrutiny point of view. No, thank you. Right, so I've got a question from Councillor Howes, first of all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As commendable as the strategy is, it is a strategy, and one of the things it omits is greenwashing. And I'll try to be as brief as I can on this, but greenwashing basically is something that's creeping across the whole of the United Kingdom quite rapidly at the moment. I've got a document from a farmer I correspond with in Dumfries and Galloway, where Bahamian-based companies are buying farms up, 6 in his local parish. They are basically outbidding because they have huge resources, and they are now planting spruce and fir, the very things that we basically had the Forestry Commission planting probably nearly a century ago. Not only that, are they fencing everything in, and in a biodiversity sense, they're actually killed on one night 80 hares and a whole number of muntjac, and they're obliterating most of the wildlife. That's in Scotland. That same is happening in Wales, but more worryingly is that DEFRA have proposed a 35,000 hectare flooding of the Somerset levels, Cambridgeshire, Norfolk Fens, Lincolnshire Fens, and parts of Lancashire is a greenwashing process in order to import food from abroad. The Foresight Group own lots of agricultural land. They are also greenwashing that because, for the simple reason, agricultural land always held a very high premium, but that premium is nothing compared with the wealth of these companies at the moment. And so it is quite possible over the next 7 years or so, by 2030, we're going to see a huge swathe of land go into greenwashing. And I think it's important that the document states a strategy for this council and liaison with other councils as probably a barrier to greenwashing, because it's going to be incredibly damaging. It will put people out of jobs. It will be very, very damaging for wildlife. And it's something that we should all be aware of and see it as part of the strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd.
Chair, I don't think there was a question in there. Was there?
Well, then the question is, can we include a greenwashing strategy in the net zero strategy, please?
Well, the strategy is going to be a live document. I'll certainly talk to officers about greenwashing. I think your interpretation of greenwashing is slightly different to my own. Greenwashing is sort of talking about the environment, but not actually tackling carbon emissions. That's not what we're about at all at NNDC. The document before you today sets out a clear strategy and a glide path to carbon neutrality by 2030. It's evidence-based, it's uses real numbers that are measured here at NNDC, is not greenwashing in any way, shape or form.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the point about it really is that we're going to see people encroaching into North Norfolk basically to greenwash their otherwise unsustainable activities. And I think we should be very, very aware of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Councillor Lloyd, for your report. And I'd like to start by saying I do agree with a lot of the aims and objectives that are set out in the report. There is one particular bullet point on page 25, and I'll read it out for the benefit of the council. Following a successful bid to the Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, the council was awarded funding to develop EV charging points across council-owned car parks. There are now 34 council-owned car charge points across the district, and these can be found at North Walsham, Wells, Holt, Sheringham, Fakenham and Cromer. My question is very simple. Why was Stalham not included in this grant funding application?
The grant funding was quite clear. It was based upon the number of properties that didn't have access to driveways or street parking, street charging. So we had to be quite careful as to where we applied the grant money, as it were. We are actually working on strategies at the moment to expand our EVCP network. And I have officers at the moment working up a paper, and I can assure you that Stalham is actually on the list. As lots of other places, we want to spread these out as widely as we can. We think it's good for the economy. We think it's good for tourism, brings people in. And so, yeah, it's the way forward. So, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Yes, I wanted to commend Councillor Lloyd for bringing this forward. But I do note that it is a strategy, and I hope that we can be assured that individual action plans to implement and deliver the various elements of it will be forthcoming in the not too distant future. I particularly am interested in the ideas of engaging with the public and our stakeholders, and wondering just what sort of plans he might have working up to engage people, because we're all partners in this and there's a huge amount to do.
Yeah, we've been clear right from the start, actually, that we want to take the residents of North Norfolk with us on this journey. The plan in front of you, strategy and plan, as we've called it, outlines how this council will achieve net zero by 2030. We've made no claim for the rest of North Norfolk, but we very much want them to come with us, and we'd like to be leaders, and we think we are leaders actually in this. We had the very first climate change forum held in August 2019, and that was attended by scientists and residents and interested people. Around about 200 people turned up to it, and in many ways they set the agenda for what we're doing within this document. That was followed up by the last green build we were able to hold before the lockdowns, where again we canvassed people. This again, it's what people want us to do. People have asked us to do this, and we very much want people to join us on the journey. And for those that think that tiny improvements in their carbon footprint don't count, I totally disagree. I just think that if everybody does a little bit nationally, it ends up being a very big figure. And I'd like everybody who might be listening to this to consider their own carbon footprint and the small measures that they can take themselves in their homes and in their businesses. Thanks.
Any more questions? So, Councillor Lloyd, you're proposing the recommendation. I'm happy to second that. Those in favour? Unanimous. Lovely. Thank you, everybody, for that. Right. Hand over to Eric now for the rest of the meeting, I think. So we're going to discuss items A to H on item 8. However, I know there is a potential amendment on item H, so we'll take that one separately, but I'm happy for you to discuss all the way through, Eric. Thank you.
Right, I'll start with recommendation B. I simply move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Adams. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Lovely, thank you. Councillor Seawood.
Right, on agenda item C, investment strategy, I move the recommendation, Chair.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Adams. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Okay. Councillor Seawood.
Right, agenda item D, treasury management strategy, I move the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Ress. Second. Thank you. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? 8E.
Fees and charges, agenda item E, I move the recommendation, Chair.
I'll second that. Those in favour? Sorry. Yes, of course, Councillor Anthony Boyle.
I'd like to draw your attention to the paragraph below, recommendation to council to approve the fees. April 22 is included in Appendix A. The next part B, the delegated authority to be given to Section 151 officers, consulting with the portfolio holders for finance and relevant heads of service. Can I ask this council why there's no mention here of the 20% increase in the charges to brown bins? And ONS on the 9th of February, portfolio recommended a 20% increase. And I'd like to know why such a large increase was put forward by the portfolio holder at a time, frankly, when people are struggling to pay their bills, energy bills and food bills. Could somebody please help me out with that one? Because it seems to be making a lot of money from the brown bins and you're now increasing them by 20%.
I'll go to Councillor Seawood first.
Well, I'm advised the current charge for brown bins is £48.50 and the increase is to £50.
I'll just confirm the Section 151 officer. Oh, no. Or Mr. Hems, either or.
Sorry, members, I've had to come up here because obviously those on the joining remotely won't be able to hear. There are two elements to the proposed increase in terms of garden bins. One, as Councillor Seawood has said, is an increase in respect of those paying by direct debit, and it does equate to the figures that Councillor Seawood has given you, and it's a similar level of increase to those paying, which is a slightly higher amount to cover the administration costs of processing payments via other methods. So the increase, my understanding is £2 for the year for both of those elements. But I will just need to check that with the 151 officer.
Can I come back on that, please?
Yes, of course.
You are right. The actual direct debit price is £58.39, and the fee you pay when you're not on direct debit is £68.40. Basically, what has been said, that there's a 10% increase, and bizarrely another 10% increase for the apparent you're going to replace all the bins at some point. Well, the extra 10% for the replacing of the bins should be already put into the price of the increase in the bins. It should not be a separate increase. It should be factored into the price of the bins, because you're not going to replace all of them. You know, it was said at ONS that after 15 years you're going to replace all the bins. In actual fact, you won't. All you will be doing is you'll be factoring probably 5% in to the cost of the bins anyway, because you're not going to replace all of them. You'll replace them as they're damaged or what have you. But the fact that you said that there's a 10% increase because all the bins that needed to be replaced is, frankly, it's absurd. So it still answers the question that I'd like to make, is why is this put under delegated powers? Why is there such a large increase, which will probably generate about £250,000 anyway? Why is this not in the papers? Why is it not going to members or full council? Sorry, cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. I think the issue has been for a number of years, there are some areas within the budget where we have to set certain fees under delegation because we don't know at the time of setting the budget what they are. There are also some, though, that we are commercially aware about. And in the past, we have published all of our figures openly when we're in a competitive market. So there are some areas where we set them under delegation because we don't necessarily want to publish them in a public document. It gives the officers the ability to flex those charges so that we can compete with other authorities and with other areas. What's happened in the past sometimes is that we have had our charges up on the website and people are able to look at those and undercut those prices. So there are a number of areas where we set them under delegation for that reason, but also because of the timing of the budgets as well. It's addressed in paragraph 2.3 on page 98.
Councillor Mancini, any? That's all right.
That actually raises another point, if I may be, if you may bear with me for a little while. One of my concerns, sorry, Charles, you're swallowing a wasp there. One of the questions I would like to ask, it makes me wonder sometimes, is this administration actually run by members, or indeed, as it looks quite often, as it looks like it's run by the officers? Because I quite often see these type of decisions made by officers rather than what I think is a very important thing should be member-led. Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Chair, it was delegated to me. One of the first questions that I asked of environmental services was that I wanted to know what they were proposing. Because if they were going to propose something that I felt was to be unacceptable in terms of any increase, I would have said no.
Thank you.
Therefore, I don't think you can have a better example of a member-led authority than that. In terms of garden bins, whether that should actually not be in public papers or not, I think is a legitimate question. And when the question was asked tonight, I said, this is the current price and this is what it's going up by. I don't know how one can be more open and more transparent than that.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree with Eric. Councillor Seaward, this did run past me. Officers do come through cabinet first. They make recommendations and we chew it over, basically. The increase in garden bins by direct debit is £1.50 this year. and the garden bin collections by any other payment is actually £1.50 as well. So that doesn't equate to 20% at all. I have no idea about the cost of the cost of replacing the bins is not, the burden of that does not fall upon the people who have the bins themselves. And I'll just repeat what Councillor, which Section 151 officer just said. We are in a competitive market for trade waste and a range of different services, and it makes no sense at all to publish all your prices publicly in the way that Councillor Mancini-Boyle is asking us to do. We're trying to run this on a commercial basis just as well as any other business that we're involved in.
Thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you. Councillor Mancini-Boyle, I don't think it's appropriate to insult members from across the chamber. And I would appreciate an apology because that was not called for.
I apologise, but you were looking at me quite shocked.
I think it was a look of disbelief because I couldn't actually see where you were pulling the 20% from or any further questions.
I just remind you, if you look at the ONS on the 9th of February on YouTube, you'll find all the information there. Thank you.
Right, thank you, members. Oh, Councillor Hayden.
Yes, I just wondered whether I could ask Councillor Lloyd to clarify that we won't be replacing all the brown bins. I've got a perfectly good brown bin. It certainly doesn't need replacing, and I would sincerely hope that we're not going to add unnecessary waste and unnecessary cost to a replacement programme when the bins are perfectly fine, serviceable.
No, that's complete common sense. The one I use at home is also in very good condition. It'll be on an as required basis, but they have been in service for 15 years across the district. Some get more use than others, and it's those that we're budgeting for replacement. But that comes out of an environmental budget. It's not based on the prices as was previously made up by Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
Right, lovely. Thank you, members. So go back to the original. We've got a proposer. I seconded. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, lovely. Thank you. Councillor Seward again, item F.
Thank you, Chairman. This is agenda item 14, the rate relief policy. I move the recommendation.
Do I have a second? Councillor Adams. Oh, you got a second. Any questions? Those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Councillor Seward, item 15.
G.
Sorry. Yeah, agenda item.
Right. Right. Item 15, draft medium-term financial strategy. I move the recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions? Those for? Oh, sorry, second. Councillor Kershaw, thank you. Those for? Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Agenda item H, Councillor Seal, before we move forward, I know there is a potential amendment, so I'd rather discuss the amendment first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment I'd like to make, please, is looking at the standard tariff car parks, and the amendment I wish to make is that they stay at their current level for the inland car parks. So that would be Holt, North Walsham, Stalham, and Fakenham. The reason for that, the thinking behind this, is that the coastal car parks have clearly, and those towns have clearly gained benefit from the upsurge in tourism. The inland car parks, particularly Stalin, North Walsham and Fakenham, we haven't seen that benefit at all. So it seems reasonable to me that actually would keep those car parking fees at their current level. Thank you.
Councillor Cushing has proposed an amendment. Do you have a second? Councillor T Fitzpatrick. Did you wish to speak?
Yeah, really just to back up what Councillor Cushing's said. I mean, we saw the influx of tourism last year, but I don't think that certainly Fakenham hasn't benefited as much. I think it's really important to protect our market towns, and people will come to the coast, but they won't necessarily come to market towns, so we want to make that easy. So I'm more than happy to support this.
Okay. So first of all, we'll vote on the amendment. So those for the, we've got proposal, we've got second. Are those for the amendment?
Sorry, could we have a recorded vote on this, please?
Yeah.
So voting for the amendment proposed by Councillor Cushing, I'll go through in alphabetical order. If you're for the amendment, against it or abstain. Councillor T Adams.
Against.
Against. Councillor Bevan Jones. Against. Councillor Birch.
Against.
Against. Councillor Blathwaite.
Against.
Against. Councillor A Brown.
Against.
Against. Councillor C Cushing.
For.
For. Councillor N Dixon. For. Councillor Fitch-Tillett.
Against.
Against. Councillor Fisher. Against. Councillor Tom Fitzpatrick.
For.
Councillor Vincent Fitzpatrick.
For.
Councillor Fredericks.
Against.
Councillor Gay.
Against.
Councillor Hayman. Councillor Heinrich. Abstain. Councillor Holiday. For. Councillor Housden. For. Councillor Kershaw. Against. Councillor Lloyd. Against. Councillor Mancini Boyle. For. Councillor Pearce. For. Councillor Penfold. Against. Councillor Perry Warnes. For. Councillor Punchard. For. Councillor Rest. For. Councillor Seward. Against. Councillor Shires. Against. Councillor Spagnola. Against. Councillor Stenton. For. Councillor Taylor. For. Councillor Toy. Against. Councillor Varley. Councillor Yasmini. Against. 1, 2, 3.
And Councillor Grove Jones.
Councillor, sorry, I've missed you.
I know.
Councillor
I've been
Grove.
sitting here all this time.
Shrinking violet.
A shrinking
I'm
violet.
sorry, I went past you.
That's so
Councillor Grove Jones.
Against.
Against. So for 4 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Against 1, 2, 3. One abstention. So against the amendment is 19.
So Councillor Cushing, the amendment fails. So we now move to the substantive motion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hayman.
Could I just ask a question with a substantive motion? Forgive me if I've missed this in the report, but I understand that towns like Cromer have several car parks. Well, they do have several car parks, but some are described at the coastal level in terms of charges, and some aren't. Has that been brought into line, and are all car parks in coastal towns on the same tariff? And if not, why not?
Councillor C.
In towns like Sheringham and Cromer, there are some car parks that have a tariff which is coastal, and there are some car parks which have a tariff which is resort. The coastal tariff is higher than the resort tariff. That is the case currently, and what is proposed in the changes that remains so. What we have done in the basis of looking at this review, and it is actually set out here, is that where a car park is coastal because it's on the coast, then it's classified as coastal. Where the car park is not on the coast, such as Station Approach in Sheringham, we've moved it from coastal to resort. And in doing so, that means that the Station Approach car park in Sheringham is now on the same footing of tariff charges as, say, the Meadows car park in Crowborough. So there is now consistency.
Thank you, Councillor Hayman. Does that answer your question?
No, not really. I think actually you're missing an opportunity to garner extra revenue. I think people coming to those towns will not necessarily be aware of those differences. And if they are, you've got, first of all, on the one hand, the possibility that people will drive around trying to find the cheaper car park. But actually, I think the more important and overriding observation is that actually you have a chance to make more money by keeping those all at the coastal level. And I just think it's a bit of a disappointment. I mean, I congratulate you on bringing the car parking charges forward. I've been banging on about this since day one when I joined the council in 2019. It's taken over 3 years to get there, or nearly the best part of 3 years to get there. And I applaud you for that. I also want to ask whether you want to make a review of car parking charges more regular, because it's been years since the last charges were reviewed. And I think it just is sound economic management, financial policy to keep those at decent market rates. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seawood.
In terms of whether we should be doing this more regularly, I am sympathetic to that argument. And in doing this, there's a number of questions that have risen in my mind that need to be looked again, and we shouldn't be waiting for 4 years. The only thing I will say about towns like Cromer and Sheringham, where there's resort and coastal car parks, is that yes, visitors do use them, but also so do local residents. And one of the thinking behind looking at this review is, in fact, if the burden is to fall anywhere, it should be on visitors rather than our local residents.
Okay. Yes, so Councillor Seawood for the recommendation. Councillor Ress.
That's a good question, if you don't mind, please. Just for clarification, I understand when we had all these discussions that there is no increase in the annual season ticket parking, but I can't see where it says that.
Well, because it's staying the same, there's no recommendation for a change.
Okay.
But it
So
stays
we're leaving it as it is.
But it stays as it is.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
As set out in the recommendations.
Okay, so I have a proposal. Do I have a second? Councillor Tory. Those in favour? Those against? Any abstention? One abstention. Lovely, thank you. So we'll move on now. Moving on now to item 9 on the agenda, recommendations on overview and scrutiny. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were 4 recommendations, all of which have been covered in the last item, namely the capital, the investment, treasury management strategies, and the fees and charges review. I have nothing further to add.
Thank you. Item 10, budget and council tax. So you've all received a separate note on the process of this item, and just to remind you that there will be a number of recorded votes. So first of all, I'll pass on to the section 151 officer, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. It's normally at this time of night that I make a joke about this being the most exciting meeting of the year because of the council tax setting, but the Chair has already made that joke, so he's beaten me to it. So just in relation to the decisions we'll be making tonight, they are set out within the report in front of you, but I'm required to take you through a couple of specific areas on the robustness of the estimates that have been made within the budget in front of you, just for the purposes of the calculations for the council tax, and also around the adequacy of the reserves. So just in terms of the robustness of the estimates, if I can refer you to pages 179 to 184 of the agenda, that provides you with details of the process that's been carried out in producing the budget, which is being presented for approval this evening. So it highlights a number of financial risks facing the authority. And in order to mitigate against some of those risks, we do put estimates together within a robust framework, but it takes account of the financial performance over the previous years. It also looks at current service delivery, and it's also been more aligned this year with the corporate plan. We've done the zero-based budgeting exercise that you'll all be aware of, so that has taken a lot of work, but it has helped to prioritise those budgets to support the corporate plan objectives. In relation to the adequacy of the reserves, can I refer you to pages 184 to 185 of the agenda, which again provides a commentary on the adequacy of the position. It includes general reserves and the earmarked reserve position. So local authorities need to have a clear statement on the policy around the framework for the reserves. So that's contained within Appendix B. So that's pages 201 to 204. And when we calculate the council tax requirement and the billing requirement, which includes the precepts, we need to have regard to the level of reserves needed to meet future business expenditure. So the policy framework for the reserves and the process of determining the minimum level reserves takes into account a number of factors, and that includes things like pay and price inflation, sensitivity around interest rates, fluctuations in relation to demand-led services, and also emergencies and unknown events. But having undertaken that assessment, my recommendation is that the level of general reserve for the next financial year remains at 2.1 million. When providing my opinion on the adequacy of reserves, the balance of the general reserve isn't considered in isolation, but it's also alongside the level of earmarked reserves that the council has, the robustness of the estimates, and the level of financial risk facing the authority. So in conclusion, as your Chief Finance Officer, the overall level reserves remains adequate in the short to medium term, and the budget for 2023 has been produced within a robust framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Ellis before we move on? Lovely. Right. Now move to the portfolio holder, Councillor Seward.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening again, members. I should like to begin by thanking officers for their time and support in preparing this budget. This year, it was not simply those officers in the finance department who excel with their unique knowledge of the workings of local government finance and crunch away at the numbers, but the wider range of officers who were involved in the zero budgeting exercise, which helped to ensure that the council's expenditure was more in line with its corporate priorities. I am pleased to say that this year the council has a balanced budget, which not only maintains the services that North Norfolk District Council already provides, but also allows for growth in some of our key public services. To be able to say that there are no cuts to services in North Norfolk places this council in a different position to many councils in England, who due to financial pressures face a further round of reducing the services they provide. It reflects the fact that the council has strong finances which are robustly managed. This is a budget about investing in public and community services, investing in our staff to bring this about. It is about striving to provide our services efficiently and providing value for money for our council taxpayers. This financial year has seen the opening of the new Reef swimming pool and leisure centre in Sheringham, which at a cost of over £12 million is one of the largest capital projects ever undertaken by this district council. As a key part of the council's green agenda, we continue to plant more trees, now over 50,000, and have been a major contributor to North Norfolk having more public electric vehicle charging points, 69, than any other district council area in Norfolk. We're also making long overdue improvements to our chalets in Cromer and Sheringham, and completed in 2021 a £4 million investment programme in new household waste collection vehicles. All this and more is being done without the council having to rely on long-term borrowing to fund these programmes. Borrowing would have meant making interest payments and incurring costs. It illustrates how soundly our finances are being managed under this Liberal Democrat-led administration. For the coming financial year, I should now like to highlight some of the key improvements to our services and facilities. New public toilets opening in Fakenham and Wales to be followed by new and refurbished toilets in North Walsham and Sheringham-the-Lees. This is taking place when in many areas public toilets have been closing, with some councils withdrawing altogether from this service. We have a different approach in North Norfolk. Public toilets are a key public service and not a luxury. An expected start in the autumn of phase 2 of the Cromer Coastal Management Scheme, a £3.9 million project that with the completed phase 1 project will help safeguard 758 residential properties from coastal erosion. And the Monthly Coastal Management Scheme, a £2.9 million project that will help safeguard 510 residential properties from coastal erosion. Apart from this council's contribution, thanks must also go to DEFRA and the town and parish councils for their financial support. Continued investment on Cromer Pier, our jewel in the crown. The new investment is to improve facilities at the theatre. Continued investment in building up our stock of temporary housing to provide quality homes to households in crisis. By the end of March, the council will have 16 temporary housing units, most already in use, with 2 further housing units to be purchased in the coming financial year. A major building programme under the Heritage Action Zone project to improve the town centre of North Walsham. It has been extended to include a new much needed bus interchange on part of the council's New Road car park. And thanks must go to Norfolk County Council and North Walsham Town Council to the contributions they are making to this project. The installation of LED lighting at the Cromer office to reduce our energy consumption and electricity costs, and contributing £900,000 to infrastructure works for the Fakenham urban extension, which in return attracts a higher rate of affordable housing in the related housing development. These projects are, of course, all being done in a climate of supply and delivery challenges along with rising costs. For the toilets in Wales and Fakenham, costs have risen 40% since the original tender was approved. To try and overcome these challenges, the council is buying up materials for projects where it can and storing them before costs arise even more. On the HAS project in North Walsham, this approach has already saved £100,000 and more is expected. I also wish to highlight how this budget is investing in our staff to provide the services that our residents need and to expect. There is rightly a high level of concern about climate change and its impact on North Norfolk. The work that the council is doing on this is a long-term project and not a temporary one. Therefore, 2 of the key posts in the climate change team are to become permanent. Concerns have rightly been expressed about the council's ability to effectively take enforcement action where there is a breach of planning regulations, as well as the council's ability to use the Section 106 contributions received from developers of major projects to improve local amenities. The planning enforcement team is to be strengthened and thus add to the progress already being made to reduce the number of outstanding cases. A fixed-term planning post is also being created to monitor and ensure the effective use of Section 106 contributions. With households facing rising energy and fuel bills, the appointment of an energy efficiency officer to help and support households struggling with energy bills. Strengthening our housing team to provide more effective support and advice to individuals and households in housing crisis. Providing apprenticeships for future local government officers. 17 people are currently completing their apprenticeships, and more apprenticeships are to be offered in the new financial year. This council is playing its part in the government skills and training agenda. I am quite often asked what the council is doing to look for new sources of income and not continue to rely on business rates, council tax and government grants. As part of our corporate plan, it was the council's intention in becoming more financially sustainable to invest in property and businesses to create new income streams. Other councils were successfully doing this and often using borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board. In 2021, the government became concerned about this approach and effectively stopped it. Commercial investment to ease the local tax burden on businesses and households in North Norfolk is therefore no longer possible. The council has instead to look for other sources of income. I give a few examples of a different approach. Firstly, strengthening the council's ability to successfully apply for grants from new funding initiatives to support our services. This ranges from the government, public and community bodies, and the private sector. It means the council can carry out projects which it would not be able to do so on its own. It has already taken place with the reef in Sheringham, external funding 1 million, and the current Heritage Action Zone project in North Walsham, external funding 2.2 million. It is also the reason that the council is strengthening the people services teams to ensure that they are best placed to take advantage of new housing and community support funding streams. Likewise, we are doing the same with the economic growth team. Organising our financial resources in a way which can better accumulate funds to offer a level of match funding with other bodies, public and private, for significant capital projects. For example, the capitalisation of our coastal management funds means that the council can build up a fund to attract more effectively through match funding investment from other public and private bodies for schemes to protect our coastline. Ensuring that the fees and charges the council makes for a range of services covers the cost of providing them. The zero budgeting exercise late last year helped this process. Improving our income streams, despite the obstacles put in our way, therefore continues to be an ongoing priority. This is rather different from the situation I inherited on becoming the Cabinet Member for Finance and Resources in December 2018. In my first budget speech in February 2019, I had to report that on asking what plans were in place to look for new income streams, I found that very little was happening. The council must also strive to be more efficient in what it does. It is about identifying where money can be saved without compromising on the quality of the services the council provides. The council continues to do this, and I give some examples. 1, stopping the wasting of public money on what I call the nice idea but undeliverable projects. That was increasingly the practice of the previous Conservative administration. I refer to pursuing the Egmere Business Park project, where no businesses were interested in coming, cost £87,000. spending £687,000 on preparing for a tennis hub in Crowler that include buying construction materials when the land on which part of the hub was to be built had not been secured. And on a smaller scale, proposing an all-weather sports pitch at North Walsham High School, along with the costs involved in doing this, without checking first that it complied with statutory limits on noise, which it did not. Saved in the current financial year, some £140,000 in bed and breakfast costs for homeless families through providing our own temporary housing units. This saving will rise to a potentially £200,000 in the coming financial year. In customer services, savings of £72,000 and potentially on longer term and potentially more as a result of outsourcing revenue and benefits inquiries. Instead, the work will be done by ourselves under the Council's one front door policy, the delivery of a better service at less cost. This year has again been a one-year financial settlement from the government, as local government continues to wait for government reviews into the future financing of council services. This makes financial planning for the future difficult, given that 58% of the income the council is to receive this year from taxpayers for its services is controlled by the government. In other words, the council has no control over a significant part of its income in future years. It is also the case that the forecast deficits for the next 3 financial years, 1.7 million to 2.7 million, are almost wholly due to the potential loss of income controlled by the government, and not because of any overspending by the council. The council cannot, of course, ignore this threat to its income base. However, what is known when I have looked back over the last 3 years is that forecast deficits have not in practice materialised. In the general fund summary that went to full council in February 2019, there were forecast deficits of around £2 million for the financial years 2020-21 to 2022-23. By the time that the budgets came to be set, in each of these years, no deficits existed. The outturn reports on what was spent each year between April 2019 and March 2021 actually showed financial surpluses being made. It is also the case that another financial surplus is likely to arise in the current financial year to March. Nevertheless, a prudent course must be steered that takes account of an uncertain financial future and a higher level of inflation than we have experienced for many years. It embraces some increases in the council's charge for certain services, as well as a small increase in the amount of council tax that the council charged its residents. The council tax increase of £4.95p for the financial year 22-23 for Band D domestic council taxpayers is proposed. It is a total annual charge by the District Council for Band D rated properties of £158.67p, or around £3 per week. It also remains the case that North Norfolk District Council has one of the lowest council tax rates amongst district councils in England. I also wish to point out to our residents that when you receive your council tax bill for the next financial year from the District Council, the charge will be very much higher than £158. This is because it also includes the council tax that is levelled by Norfolk County Council. Band D rate is reported at £1,516 per annum, and the Norfolk Police and Crime Commissioner, as well as town and parish councils. The District Council sends out the bills. However, most of the money it collects from you, the residents, over 90p in every pound, goes elsewhere. Nearly all of it to the Conservative-run County Council and the Conservative Policing Crime Commissioner, both of which have again increased council tax this year. In conclusion, this is a budget that invests in services for the residents of Norfolk, that invests in staff to deliver those services, and does so with one of the lowest district council tax rates in England. It meets the necessary legal requirements and has been signed off by the council's Section 151 officer. I therefore commend to you the recommendations set out in the Budget and Council Tax Report 2022-2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seaward. I'd now like to ask for a seconder for the budget. Councillor Adams, thank you. Do you wish to reserve the right to speak? Yes, please. Thank you. I move to Councillor Cushing for your response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too would like to start by thanking the finance team for all the work that they've done to compile this budget, which I know is a considerable work every year. And I'd also like to thank Officer Hume as well for spending time to brief sort of the Conservative finance team. Always astonished at her enthusiasm for the figures, so I do really appreciate that. It comes no surprise to Councillor Seaward. Notice that I think this is actually an extremely disappointing budget that does little to address the future needs of the council. First of all, I would say I'm pleased to note that the books will be balanced this year, though I think the picture painted is not perhaps as rosy as he might say. What he's actually saying is everything will be okay provided that the central government actually sort of make up the budget instead of doing sort of the annual 1 year forecasts. I think actually overall, looking at the forecast position, it's actually quite perilous. And actually, I think the figures are somewhat worse than are shown. One of the things that's actually notable when you look through Appendix A is the delivery plan. I think this administration spent something like £2 million or so on the delivery plan. But if you look down there, you'll actually note that that spending comes to a complete end and there's no forecast figures in there at all going forward. Now, whoever is running this council in years to come, it is likely that they're going to want to spend some money on a corporate plan. So I actually think those forecast figures are somewhat unrealistic. Also, I'd say that we've passed, agreed earlier this evening, the net zero carbon plan, and we're all consensus of that. But actually, there are very few figures in there. And I do know one of the preambles to that says that that delivery will entail significant costs, many of which are actually not in the plan itself. So potentially, we have millions more there in the forecast deficit than actually is shown. In the last two budget reviews, I've raised warnings about the impending deficit, and these were met by a response by Councillor Seaward that the council has always forecast deficits and not unduly concerned. And indeed, you have repeated effectively those words this evening, much to my surprise, I actually have to say. I think my motto would be always a case of hope for the best, but plan for the worst. If you're looking at the forecast deficit now, we're looking at potentially as only as could be as close as 14 months' time. What I find striking about the budget and the medium-term financial strategy is there are no credible strategy to address these anticipated shortfalls in coming years. The only action we passed this evening was to increase car parking fees, which is to agree milking the golden cow. But in itself, there's going to raise fairly minimal numbers looking at the shortfalls of millions that we can anticipate. Councillor Seaward says he can do no more until the government define their longer term funding plans. Now, I do acknowledge that that creates uncertainty. However, this wait and see policy, in my view, is a complete dereliction of duty. The government faces financial challenges like which have not been seen since the Second World War, following the support required to bolster the economy during the COVID pandemic. Also, consumers are facing spiralling global energy costs, yet the Civil Democrat administration has done very little to help. Two ways of doing this. One is actually increasing the income generation, and the second is to find efficiencies and thereby find cost savings as well. Now, increasing income, I admit, is no necessarily easy thing, but beyond buying a few industrial units in North Walsham, not aware of too much more that's come to mind. Now, Councillor Seward is correct when he says the government has stopped the option of councils borrowing to invest in speculative properties, which is one option that they said they were going to explore. I'm conscious that we are the keepers of taxpayers' money, and I'm not in any way advocating this council should take a speculative approach. I do believe, though, that if this administration had the will, there would be some low-risk ideas that could have been generated and explored. Indeed, the previous leader assured us that they had some confidential game-changing ideas, but they've never been revealed. Makes me wonder whether they ever actually existed. And some of us will recall that we went to workshops, I believe, around November 2019 to brainstorm those, but again, nothing ever came through. Never saw anything from that. The other option is to find savings, and this should be easier done because it's actually within the gift of the council. Now, all organisations have waste in them, and you can always find ways to save money. This should be a standard thing, a matter of course for any council to do. The more efficient the organisation, the more funds you have available to spend on services and building up reserves to prepare for the rainy day. Again, no effort has been made beyond reducing temporary housing costs to accomplish this. Now, Councillor Seward goes back in history talking about the previous Conservative administration. Well, the last Conservative administration initiated a number of, in 2016 and 2017, initiated a number of money-saving proposals that are now estimated to deliver nearly £750,000 worth of revenue savings for the council per annum. This administration will need no such a dividend to the one that follows it next year. Now, I had great hopes of the zero budgeting process and be fully supportive of that. That was undertaken last year. And I do appreciate that it wasn't done necessarily to deliver cost changes as such. However, it must surely have been a legitimate expectation that would have been a byproduct of the exercise. We've been told that zero-based budgeting has given the council a better idea of how money is spent, yet no indication of where there might be waste that could be eradicated. One thing I wasn't expecting, though, was instead of identifying ways to save money, is that the exercise has generated a spending wish list of projects amounting to something like 2.25 million. And I'm told that there's expectation that that 2.25 million will be approved. Well, that's just going to make the budget deficit position even worse. Instead of looking for ways for savings, this administration has exacerbated the situation. In 2019, we had the ill-conceived and ill-executed capability review, which wasted £30,000. And at the time, certainly wasted considerably more since. Back in 2020, the administration created numerous management positions and salary upgrades, which cost over £500,000. In the last year, they made matters even worse. The administration created a large number of new managerial roles and clerical roles, which totaled over £550,000. Put together, this council spent over £1 million worth on new staff roles, and I view that's a shameful waste of limited council funds. Now, one of the key proposals that Councillor Seward has articulated is the proposal to increase the district council's element of the council tax to the maximum of £4.95. This will raise about £200,000. Now, he mentions that the council are raising their element of the council tax. No one can doubt the huge pressure on the county's budget as it struggles to cope with social care costs. Even so, the county's leadership have rejected their officer's recommendation to increase this to 3.99% instead of opting to 2.99%. This is motivated by the desire to tax residents as little as possible while maintaining their services. The only justification to increasing the district council's tax is if everything else has been done to cut to the bone. As I explained, the Liberal Democrats have lavished £550,000 worth on needless staff interests in the last years. These funds alone could not only have been used to negate any council tax increases this year, they could be used for next year and actually gone a long way for negating any need to raise council taxes in the year after that. This is exactly the position that the neighbouring Conservative-run Broadland District Council have decided to do in terms of freezing their council tax, saying they want to do their bit to help hard-pressed residents and businesses. However, in North Norfolk, the Liberal Democrats have put the needs of the council before the residents they're meant to serve. Conservatives, we want to help North Norfolk residents. As a consequence, we'll be voting against the council tax rise. At the last council meeting, Councillor Butikoff likened the council to an ocean-going liner. I have to say, I think that's a fairly appropriate description. Both carry passengers. Under the Liberal Democrats, it's been going round in circle for the last 3 years, and I now believe it's actually heading towards the rocks. In that meeting, it was revealed that no cabinet member put themselves forward to be leader. I could assume that the only reason for that is that cabinet members understand the parlous position the administration have placed the council in, so none of them want the poison challenge of the leadership. This budget is bereft of ideas to help address the funding challenges that this council faces. They've hiked car parking fees and they intend to hike up the council tax. Beyond that, they live in hope the government will make up the anticipated shortfall. I believe North Norfolk deserves better, and it's a shame this council is going to have to wait another year before a courageous, experienced and bolder Conservative administration be elected to pick up the pieces. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Cushing, thank you. Councillor C, would you have 10 minutes to reply to Councillor Cushing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I don't know where the figure of £550,000 comes from for more staff. Having been given that figure, I will make inquiries, but when we did the management structure, the guidance that was given to the Chief Executive was that it had to be cost neutral, and reports that came to the council said so. And the only other thing I will say is that when I became the cabinet portfolio holder in December 2018, and I was preparing the budget for 1920, I had deficits in front of me. That was left to me by the previous Conservative administration. It's always a question when the Tories are in opposition, they say one thing. When they're in power, they say something and do something else. But then why should we be surprised, Chairman? It's what we've known that they do in government.
Thank you, Councillor Seward. Councillor Rest.
Thank you, Chairman. I get the easy bit. Most people have spoken about everything everyone wants to know, so I will just give a very brief summary. I think it is fair to say at this current time, there are some finance officers, council leaders and cabinet members in local authorities who would love to be able to announce that they have a balanced budget to present to their members. So on that point, we will congratulate this authority and their officers with that achievement. The last couple of years have been extremely challenging for local authorities and will continue to be so. This administration doesn't have a magic wand to wave away the issues it doesn't want to deal with. Therefore, we applaud some of the hard decisions they have had to make. Yes, we would always like to see more growth opportunities and long-term future plans presented. But we should be aware of projects that have failed in the past due to a lack of strategic planning and be ready to learn the lessons from these experiences. We must continue to strive to obtain best value for money. I was pleased to see in the report that some of the suggestions made by the independent group over the past year have been included. I am confident that the independent group will support this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seward, you have right to reply to Councillor Rest. No, thank you. Councillor Cushing, you can reply to Councillor Seward's response.
Yes, Mr. Chair. When he asked actually where the 550,000 came from, it actually came from the overview and scrutiny meeting papers in October. So you'll find them clearly articulated in there. As you actually haven't answered many of the questions I raised in this. It's actually about preparing this budget, this council for the future. And my premise is that I really do not believe this administration spends an awful lot of time, really it puts the effort into looking at that it should do. And it certainly puts very little effort into finding cost efficiencies and savings. Now, if you can tell me some that you actually made are actually on the books to come through, I'd be interested to hear about them. But I have to say, I go to just for every cabinet meeting, I go to all the overview and scrutiny meetings. I never see anything coming through on those figures. And now that's one thing that is within the gift. And as I say, all councils, all organisations have waste in them. And I think that should be a priority to look at that, because any money you save obviously can be put back into saving to helping provide the services that we want this council to deliver. So that's what I know. So I'll close there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cushing. I'll now be moving forward to open up to the main debate. But just to clarify with members around any amendments that may be tabled on a financial basis, can I confirm the section 151F if you've had any in writing which should be submitted?
I haven't, Chair, no.
Okay, so just to clarify, if there are any amendments, they can be made, however, they can't be of financial implication because they'd have to be submitted beforehand. Each member is allowed to speak for 5 minutes. So I shall open up for members if they've got. Councillor Rest.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just refer to page 211 and just get a little bit of clarification, if at all possible? It regards the council tax summary. Are we just able to confirm that the NNDC's rise is 3.2%, as it states, and that the parish town council precepts is 5.7%? I see Lucy is nodding, so I will take that as a yes. My question is, are the figures provided by the parish town council scrutinised? Are the parish and town council encouraged to use their reserves in order to reduce their financial demands? And does NNDC's finance department have a record of the current reserves being held by the individual parish town councils? If they are recorded in the financial papers, where can I find them? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rest. In terms of scrutiny, I believe that all of those conversations and those decisions are made in public meetings from the town and parish councils, so I think they are open and transparent. You'll have heard me talk before about the referendum principles that, again, I'll talk to you in a little while about, but town and parish councils at the moment don't have those restrictions like we do, so we would be talking tonight about a £4.95 pence increase. We can't go above £5 without having a referendum. Similarly with the police and the county council, if they have increases above those limits, they would have to have a referendum. So the public would have to be involved to vote to support any higher increases. And the town and parish councils don't have those. However, we do normally advise them to stay within reasonable limits, because central government have suggested that if they are to increase significantly, they could look to impose those restrictions, but they haven't done yet. In terms of their reserve positions, we would normally only get that information for the bigger preceptors. But again, they should be public record. So if you are interested in those, they should be publicly available. And I think your last, oh, sorry, I've answered the last question. But in terms of the reserves, again, I would expect that those town and parish councils to use their reserves prudently, as we do. But yes, there will certainly be instances where they have reserves, but often for particular projects on a town by town basis.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to draw councillors' attention to page 207. £48,000 for the acquisition of 7 printers. That works out at £6,857 per printer. Now that is a great deal of taxpayer money, especially when we compare that to the poverty dashboard. You know, what looks to be a fantastic project, which will try to identify the most vulnerable families across North Norfolk. How can this Liberal Democrat administration justify spending double the amount of money on printers as it can identifying our most vulnerable families?
Councillor Shires.
I can take that if that's okay. That is a budget for the replacement for every single printer across the organisation. That is not what we are forecasting that we will need to spend this year. Obviously, if nothing needs replacing, we won't be spending it.
Apologies, but in the comment section, it says the acquisition of 7 multi-function printers as existing printers aren't supported.
Okay, so those are the ones in the print room. Have you been to the print room?
No, I have not.
Okay, next time you're in and I'm here, I will take you to the print room and you can see the printers that are there, but they are not on their last leg. So that would only need to be spent should the printers fail.
Okay, so could you clarify for me, is this for every printer in the building, as you said?
Sorry.
Or for the 7 printers?
No, I'm referring to the print room printers.
The print room, so it's
Yeah.
7 printers at a price of £6,857 per printer. Yes?
Should they need to be replaced?
Should they need to be replaced?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I think that is a lot of money, you know, especially given some of the other points in this spreadsheet, but.
Okay, that's fine. That's a capital bid, so it has to be sent on actual physical items. But come with me next time you're here.
Okay.
And I will take you to the print room. And if you have any suggestions, then I'd be really happy to take them.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Vincent Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to remind members of an exercise that was conducted last year, which was a consultation with residents and businesses on the budget. And I quote, "Consulting residents and ratepayers on District Council budget for next financial year is an important part of the budget making process." And we saw a nice a what if type budget analysis tool on the website, and really sort of you know, great thing. And I spoke to several members, several residents and businesses within the Stibbard ward, which I represent, and see some people sceptical, let's put it mildly, and I sort of downplayed these fears. That no, the council is wanting to consult with you on the shape of next year's budget. So to help answer my ward residents' questions, could I actually have some specific instances of how the budget was changed and influenced by this consultation? Thank you.
Councillor Seawood.
Well, one of the things that came back from the consultation is that residents want services. They want those to be maintained, but they also want value for money. And in what I've said tonight, I would hope that that's been reflected both in terms of the services we continue to provide, and that we do it on the basis that it's value for money.
Mr. Chairman, to be honest, I'm a bit underwhelmed by the portfolio holder's answer there. I did ask for specifics, and we're talking about bean counting, we're talking about a budget. So I was actually looking for something more substantial and something specific rather than value for money. Yeah, we all like value for money. We want services maintained. I'm afraid I can't measure that, you know, and would I feel happy passing that message on to my ward residents? No, I'm afraid I wouldn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Hayden.
Yes, I'd just like a couple of issues I'd like to raise. One is about the Public Loans Works Board access to funds. I'm not sure, but do correct me if I'm wrong. Perhaps Section 151 officer will do that. But I did, Councillor Seawood indicated that all lending had been curtailed by the previous Chancellor. And my understanding was that that wasn't the case, and that you can have access to funds, particularly where you own land or assets that you plan to develop. And I'd like to draw his attention to, if that is the case, in terms of diversifying his income and lessening the impact on the council taxpayer, that there is an oven-ready plan to develop the site on top of the Melbourne Slopes toilets, which was commissioned by the previous administration and then shelved, which would actually provide for a restaurant and other facilities, which would bring in income in a prime tourist location. So there are things that he could do if the Section 151 officer can clarify that those monies are available. The second thing is, which is, crowed about the fact that he had no deficits, but as I've mentioned before, part of the reason for that is that so little has been done by this administration in the last 3 years that it's not surprising that they haven't run up a deficit, because they've done very little. And the other thing that I want to raise, which another colleague raised, which was about bearing down on some of the parish town councils. And I think you might want to turn to his colleague, the leader of the district council on his left, who is in charge of Cromer Town Council, which has one of the highest precepts of a town council anywhere. It's about 60% of the overall precept that's raised by the district council, and it does nothing. It provides absolutely nothing for the council taxpayers. At least I know from my precept from the district council that my bins will be emptied, etc. Cromer Town Council provides nothing. So if we perhaps can look to bearing down, or at least seeing that there's good practice, and that the town councils and parish councils in future can help the citizens of North Norfolk by reducing the precepts that they're responsible for.
I'll move to Councillor. I think there was a question there for the Section 151 officer. First of all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Hayman. Yes, just in relation to the PWLB loans, there is still access available to local authorities where you want to invest in things like regeneration potentially, or affordable housing. What you're not able to do is borrow that money for commercial purposes and to generate income.
And Councillor Seawood, anything further to add?
I've nothing to add. I think the 151 officer succinctly explained it. In case of the building at the Melbourne Slopes, that was advertised for leasing. A suitable potential occupier of that building was identified and found. We hoped that that would materialise, but unfortunately recently they pulled out. So it's now we're back to square one and we're having to re-advertise.
Thank you. Right, do we have any further questions from councillors? Councillor Penfold.
Oh, sorry. Good evening, members. I always enjoy listening to Councillor Cushing. No, I do really, particularly this evening, Councillor Cushing, to your tissue of fiction, because I now realise it is physically possible to chuckle and grimace at the same time. Now, I know, Councillor Cushing, you're relatively new to council, being one of the few Conservatives elected in May 2019. So I imagine your memory is short when it comes to council budgets and administrations. So I'd just like to tell you a little story. And in fact, it might be a story that you yourself have heard and maybe even read. Perhaps we can all imagine as we sit round the campfire one clear summer's evening in 2019 and prepare for our bedtime story. But no ordinary story are we about to read. Oh no, Mr. Chairman, for this story is a tale so horrible, so frightful in all its awfulness, that it is one that will remain with us for many years to come. The title of this book, of this tale, Mr. Chairman, you may have guessed it. NNDC, The Conservative Years, Tales of Tory Terror. But yes, this is the story of the previous Conservative administration, and it is indeed a terrifying story of mismanagement, neglect, waste and chaos. The themes of this book are gradually revealed. Themes of infighting, of fallouts, walkouts, incompetence, and a huge waste of public money and a lack of transparency. As we read on, the chapter headings become clear. Crisis at Cadogan Road and North Lodge Park, Cromer. Chaos as the CEO and senior staff walk out. Shocker at the Shannocks in Sheringham. It's quite hard to say that, actually. In fact, the Sheringham chapter has many subheadings, including the loss of the Sheringham TIC, the failure to maintain the beach chalets there, and the losing of the station approach public toilets. The terror, the next chapter, the terror of the tennis hub in Cromer, and most horrible and most spine-chilling of all, the dreadful final chapter, Nightmare on Egmere Street. The chapter we all know brought down the whole rotten Tory administration before. Now contrast that, Councillor Cushing, if you will, with this new story, the one perhaps you're refusing to read, the story of the Liberal Democrat-controlled North Norfolk District Council, a story of prudence, of growth, of service delivery and sustainability, a story that keeps getting better and better as you read and experience it. It contains such fabulous chapters as the wonderful new Reef Leisure Centre in Sheringham, successful tree planting and installing of EV charging points, blue flag beaches and green flag parks, of the Heritage Action Zone, of success at the Shannocks in Sheringham and at the Cedars in North Walsham. Record numbers of affordable homes and of communities supported through the enhancement of services. And all this delivered through the prudent and wise financial management and oversight of Councillor Seawood and the officer team. So tonight, perhaps as Councillor Cushing and your Conservative colleagues, you climb wearily up the stairs to your beds, perhaps with a Horlicks in your hand, perhaps you could learn the lessons of the horror story of the previous Conservative administration. If you don't, you may need industrial strength tranquilizers to get you off to sleep after such a nightmarish read. But instead, Councillor Cushing and your Tory colleagues, do read something calming, comforting, and successful. The story of the Lib Dems here at NNDC. You'll sleep well and soundly in the knowledge that you are indeed in safe hands. Sweet dreams.
Thank you, Councillor Penfold. If only you'd engaged me for 5 minutes at school like that.
You're asking for a detention, Councillor Pritchard. I always told you stories like that.
Now, Councillor Fitzpatrick, if you can beat that, carry on.
I'm not sure I could beat that, but I'm glad Councillor Penfold mentioned Horlicks, because I think that was the underlying theme of his obviously well-prepared little bit. So, you know, we're roughly a year from the next election, and all we do is hark back to previous administrations. Well, you know, we had our troubles. Goodness knows, I know I had my troubles, but we did a huge amount to turn around the council. And I think despite the problems, we've been very proud of it. Sheringham Leisure Centre, well, where did that start? The obsession with Egmere, that's something that was agreed by the local enterprise partnership. Indeed, our excellent council officers were the ones that recommended that. And as a result of not actually putting the investment in that would have kept jobs there, we actually lost 120 jobs from there within the past year. So if you think that's drawing well-paid jobs to this area, that's fine. But yeah, I say, yes, there were plenty of problems. There were plenty of egos. I've got an ego, and there are plenty of other egos that were just as bad as mine or as good as mine, depending how you look at it. And some of those people are here, some on this side, some other sides. But I would suggest to say, nice bedtime drink, Horlicks, well done, Councillor Penfold, but please don't enter that for the Booker Prize. Fiction it may be, but not really quite believable. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? Oh, Councillor Cushing.
Well, I do feel moved to reply to Councillor Penfold. I had to say I don't think J.K. Rowling has got too much to worry about. There we go. Well, I make the point. I mean, if you're doing so well, I suppose what comforts me is this particular thought. It's the memories of, we're going back in time now, the last general election where we won the constituency by a huge majority. The memories of the county council elections last year, which resulted in a Conservative triumph. We won more seats than any other party. The memory of the by-elections where we successfully defended Holt, where we successfully took the coastal ward, overturned a significant Liberal Democrat majority, and also last December alone at Stalham, where we overturned a huge Liberal Democrat majority. When I took over my group, Councillor Penfold, there were only 6 of us. There are now 10. Who knows, there may be more by the end of this session. But certainly from my group's perspective, we are certainly looking forward to the rematch next year, and I'm absolutely confident that will result in a next new Conservative administration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, if there's no further questions, we shall move to the pinnacle. Councillor Dixon from Overview and Scrutiny.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alas, Mr. Chairman, I can't match the loquacious set piece story of Councillor Penfold, so you'll have to settle for an account from Overview and Scrutiny that I will deliver now. I can confirm that Overview and Scrutiny Committee debated the 22-23 budget and the medium-term financial strategy at its January meeting, and that it was satisfied the budget was both viable and balanced. The medium-term financial strategy has been carefully monitored over several meetings, and the consistent discussion and feedback has mostly focused on the circa £2 million gap in future years and the significant risks associated with how to close it and the impact of future spending growth. While accepting that a series of one-year settlements doesn't help accurate forecasting, it has to be said that our current financial health has been largely helped by the continuation of various government grant funding schemes that were expected to stop by now. Overview and Scrutiny has consistently called for revenue generation and efficiency-based savings. But to date, nothing has emerged of significance, and that's a concern that I have to draw to full council attention today. While Overview and Scrutiny has noted with concern the funding implications of the management restructure and regrading, it has also challenged how suggested increases of staff would be funded in various papers. And Overview and Scrutiny has been very clear they should not be progressed unless they are proven to be revenue generating to pay for themselves and some. For those reasons, while Overview and Scrutiny is content with the proposed budget, it's concerned this council doesn't have a gap-filling backup plan, nor has it factored in the cost of some very expensive key strategic ambitions, such as the net zero strategy before you earlier in our agenda today. I am heartened Councillor Seward has acknowledged the need to fill that gap, and in conclusion, I can do no more than quote his very words that the storm clouds are gathering. Let's hope they aren't called Dudley, Eunice or Franklin. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. I'm aware we've had no amendments actually proposed during our exciting discussions and debate, so the substantive motion stands. I will now hand over to the seconder of the motion, Councillor Adams, who will have up to 10 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't take 10 minutes. I just first of all wish to reflect on what Councillor Cushing has said tonight, and the fact there's no amendments provided by the opposition group. So I would question the strength of the opposition. We would always welcome the opposition group bringing forward proposals for discussion. But it seems really they have very little to actually propose, and underwhelmed, I believe, was what Councillor Fitzpatrick said, and indeed. Cromer Town Council, I really don't understand the relevance to what you were saying, Councillor Hayman. It became one of the most successful town councils in Norfolk after your tenure as mayor there. So that aside, we're not there to discuss the town councils. Portraying us as being in a perilous position, I believe is simply false, and certainly worlds away from the Conservative controlled county council, where I believe the budget was described by several councillors as close your eyes and hope for the best. And I know even rejected by one of your own activists locally on a public forum today. The projected deficits, they're in tens of millions in immediate years, and the Conservatives have shown they are frankly chaotic nationally, as we all know, but it's certainly the case that they are chaotic locally also. Residents can be confident in this budget. It is robust and we are delivering against our targets. I also wish to say I feel this budget will ensure resilience of the council and the district. We've clearly wanted to fund some positions like the energy officer and additional housing officers, and we're continuing to invest in cedar fences. Our environmental policies will yield savings, as will the continued investments in temporary accommodation. We're continuing to unashamedly invest in tourism related assets and infrastructure, and which is delivering its revenue, of course. But despite all of this, we have one of the lowest charges of any district council. So that's simply what I wanted to say upon reflection, hearing the opposition group and listening to the debate. And I thank everyone for their involvement in it. Thank you.
Councillor Adams, thank you. And Councillor Seaward, it's your right to speak last. And for the only item, there's no time limit. If you could keep it
I do
very
not expect to say much more. I think I've said more than enough this evening. Particularly as I'm not a councillor or a politician that that thrives on egos or has very much time for it. What I think I'll say looking forward is this, and I noted Councillor Dixon's phrase about gathering storm clouds. Can I just say I have no intention of being caught in the rain that might come from it, or any downpour. The record is, for the last 3 years, is that in spite of all the storm clouds that have been there, we've always produced balanced budgets. We've never had to cut services. We've kept council tax low, and that is my intention on how we will move forward. And what it is a steady hand on the tiller. And I'm not going to panic and suddenly say, we've got to cut this, we've got to reduce that, we've got to go hunting around the building for waste. I don't actually believe there is a lot of waste in the building. On the other hand, I am conscious of what's there. But as I've just said, I have no intention of being caught in any downpour. I therefore, once again, move these recommendations.
Councillor Seaward, thank you. We will now take recorded votes and proposing that this will be items 1 to 8 unless any member requests they're taken differently. No, so I'll hand over to Officer Jordan.
Thank you. So taking recommendations of item 10, 1 to 8 on block in alphabetical order. Councillor Adams, for Councillor Bevan Jones, for Councillor Birch, for Councillor Blathwaite, for Councillor Brown, for Councillor Cushing.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Dixon. Abstain. Councillor Fitch-Tillett. 4. Councillor Fisher.
4.
4. Councillor T. Fitzpatrick. Abstain. Councillor V. Fitzpatrick. Abstain. Councillor Fredericks. 4. 4. Councillor Gay. 4. Councillor Grove Jones. 4. 4. Councillor Hayman. Abstain. Councillor Heinrich. 4. Councillor Holiday. Abstain. Councillor Housden. 4. Councillor Kershaw.
4.
4. Councillor Lloyd.
4.
4. Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Pearce.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Penfold.
4.
4. Councillor Perry Warnes. 4. Councillor Punchard. 4. Councillor Rest. 4. Councillor Seaward. 4. Councillor Shires. 4. Councillor Spagnola. 4. Councillor Stenton. Abstain. Councillor Taylor. Abstain. Councillor Toy.
4.
4. Councillor Varley. 4. Councillor Yasmini. 4.
I believe that's carried.
It's carried 24-10.
Thank you. Right, we're moving on to items 9 and it's item 10 on the agenda, but recommendations 9 and 10. There has been a slight adjustment to the council tax calculation, and I'll now hand over to the Section 151 officer, Mr. Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, could we split the vote on these ones, please? Do a recorded vote on each one. Can we split them both? Do a separate vote for 9 and a separate vote for 10, please?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. We're now moving on to the statutory council tax calculations for the 2022-23 financial year, and they are set out before members within section 4 of the report, which can be found on pages 185 to 196. And these are the calculations that you're asked to approve this evening. Section 4.9 specifically considers the excessiveness determination. So in my role as your 151 officer, I've determined that the council's relevant basic amount of council tax for 2022-23 is not excessive in accordance with the principles approved under section 52ZB of the Local Government Finance Act 1992. So further to this, as the billing authority, we haven't been notified by a major precepting authority that its relevant basic amount of council tax is excessive either, and the billing authority is not required to hold a referendum again in accordance with section 52ZK of the Local Government Finance Act. So I'd now like to hand back to the portfolio holder, if I can, to propose the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Taking the vote separately, can I therefore move recommendation 9 that members undertake the council tax and statutory calculations set out at section 4 and set the council tax for 2022-23.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Adams. So we'll now go to recorded vote on part 9 of item 10.
Thank you. So going to the vote for agenda item 10, recommendation number 9. Councillor Adams. 4. For Councillor Bevan-Jones. 4. For Councillor Birch.
4.
For Councillor Blathwaite. 4. For Councillor Brown. 4. For Councillor Cushing.
4.
For Councillor Dixon. 4. For Councillor Fitch-Tillett. 4. For Councillor Fisher. 4. For Councillor Fitzpatrick T. For Councillor V Fitzpatrick. For Councillor Fredericks. For Councillor Gay. For Councillor Grove Jones. For Councillor Hayman. For Councillor Heinrich. For Councillor Holiday. For Councillor Housden. For Councillor Kershaw. For Councillor Lloyd.
4.
For Councillor Mancini Boyle.
4.
For Councillor Pearce.
4.
For Councillor Penfold. For Councillor Perry Warnes. For Councillor Punchard.
4.
For Councillor Rest. For Councillor Seaward.
4.
For Councillor Shires. For Councillor Spagnola. For Councillor Stenton. For Councillor Taylor. For Councillor Toy.
4.
For Councillor Varley. For Councillor Yasmini. For unanimous.
Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. We've already heard from the section 151 officer. So back to Councillor Seaward for part 10.
I therefore move the recommendation set out in paragraph 10. I think it's in front of members, so I don't have to read it out, Chairman.
Do I have a second? Councillor Adams, thank you. And we'll go to another recorded vote.
So the recorded vote for agenda item 10, recommendation number 10, Councillor Adams. For Councillor Bevan-Jones. For Councillor Birch.
4.
For Councillor Blathwaite. For Councillor Brown. For Councillor Cushing.
Against.
Against. Councillor Dixon. Against. Councillor Fitch-Tillett. For Councillor Fisher. For Councillor T Fitzpatrick. Against. Councillor V Fitzpatrick. Against. Councillor Fredericks. For Councillor Gay. For Councillor Grove Jones. For Councillor Hayman. Against. Councillor Heinrich. For Councillor Holiday. Against. Councillor Housden. For Councillor Kershaw. For Councillor Lloyd. For Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Against.
Councillor Pearce.
Against.
Councillor Penfold. For Councillor Perry Warnes. For Councillor Punchard. For Councillor Rest. Abstain. Councillor Seward. For Councillor Shires. For Councillor Spagnola. For Councillor Stenton. Against. Councillor Taylor. Against. Councillor Toy. For Councillor Varley. For Councillor Yasmini. For. At 23. 10 and 1.
Okay, thank you everyone and appreciate that lengthy debate and discussion, but it's always very important, and thanks for everyone who took part. Moving on to item 11 on the agenda, which is the pay policy statement, which is a statutory report that comes to council annually. I'll hand over to Councillor Adams.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Little further to say on this is that you will be familiar with the budget meeting, likely already roughly familiar with the paper as it's set out, and its purpose is set out in the explanatory pages 219 to 225, with the salary grades set out in latter pages. I'm certainly pleased with some of the differences the most recent appointments are making to this council, and I would propose this is accepted. Thank you.
And do you have a second, Councillor Seward? Do you wish to speak or you have? No. Okay, yeah. So those in favour? Yeah, that's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Conscious we've been going for nearly 2 hours. Are we happy to continue as we're near the end? Lots of nodding heads. Thank you. Portfolio holders reports. So there's a few reports that come through, and there's been some today from Emma. I'll allow portfolio holders if they've got anything to update verbally. Yes, Councillor Kershaw.
Thank you, Chair. It's just something that needs to be said. Over the period of the pandemic, we've been well served by a dedicated band of officers that have gone out in all weathers to make North Norfolk a safer place under the guidance of Steve Hams and Emily Capps. They've delivered medicines to residents, collected shopping for vulnerable people, carried out track and trace, which finishes at midnight tonight, and have done 10,000 contacts since October 21. They also ran the COVID Safe Award scheme, ensuring businesses were safe, reassuring for residents and tourists alike. They've patrolled our towns, beaches and promenades, engaging with the general public, helping them feel safe and secure, and with a sense of humour. They've been flexible in their duties, putting up signage, generally have been a reassuring force, which has ensured that North Norfolk have had one of the lowest rates of COVID over the last 2 years. The council recognises what they have done for the community and owe them a debt of gratitude. These people are our COVID support officers, and I would like to record a sincere vote of thanks to them for their selfless service over this period. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Cabinet? No. Right, do we have any questions for Cabinet members? Councillor Hayman, first of all.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the leader of the council, Councillor Tim Adams, what he plans to do about the terrible rat problem in Cromer and other coastal towns, but particularly Cromer. I know that's not in his gift as leader, but actually he does represent Cromer. The rat problem there is appalling. It's been worse than I've ever seen it in all the years that I've lived there, and I've had lots of people complaining. The rats are particularly present at the moment around North Lodge Park, and they've been seen running into the women's toilets in North Lodge Park around the sunken garden area and by the children's play area to the south of North Lodge Park along the coastal path. They're very present. They've invaded people's homes that are adjacent to the seafront and are a huge health hazard. It's a terrible advertisement to holidaymakers. They're present in daylight and people have complained about seeing them running unfettered. What will he do? What will he get the council to do to try and deal with this problem?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Hayman. I believe it's really directed to me as a local member rather than leader, but I am happy to answer that. I will get back to you, Councillor Hayman, after I've had a further conversation with officers on where we are presently with this matter. You and I have probably spoken about this before. It's certainly, occasionally we've had complaints, particularly with the Marams. It's a very porous area, lots of food sources with the cliff top plant life. I don't accept that there's a great deal of public concern about this matter. Generally, I'm not seeing reports of that. I believe it's fairly commonly a common occurrence over the winter period to see obviously rats get into people's homes, sadly. We do obviously offer household support with the service, and the details can be found on the website. But what you've asked is more concerning public realm areas, North Lodge Park, seafront areas, etc. And I certainly have not received any reports of issues affecting public conveniences. So that's a new one, but of course we can look into that, and I will write to you, Councillor Hayman. Thank you. Councillor Tory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just check on a point of order, please? It says members are reminded that they may ask questions of the cabinet member on their reports and portfolio areas. I don't believe that was in this portfolio report.
I believe that the leader said he was happy to answer.
Yeah, I agree that he's happy to answer it, but I just wanted to clarify that point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Rest next.
Thank you, Chairman. Question is for Councillor Fredericks on page 234. Sorry about that. It relates around this appointment of an energy officer, which I understand I heard today. Can I just clarify a couple of things? Is it full-time or part-time? And it says here, suitable property and support owner occupiers and landlords with applications for improvement works. Is that a fee that we will be charging, or is it a free service that we're going to be offering?
Thank you, Councillor Rest. Yeah, I'm delighted that our energy officer will be here with us on the 7th of March. And I'll look forward to meeting her. As for the improvement works, what that is actually it goes into the Warm Homes grant. So the energy officer is going to be helping identify families, households, landlords, and helping them through that process. So yeah, so it's all connected with that. Does that answer your question?
So
that's a full-time post.
Sorry, so that service, the person goes to the home and gives them the advice, that's all part of being covered by the cost of the Warm Homes?
Yeah.
Okay. It might have been useful if I'd have seen that, but I accept your point.
No worries.
Thank you.
Councillor Howes, the next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, this is for Councillor Fredericks as well. On the test and trace statistics support payments, there were 258 approved in total. I just wonder what is the financial value of the total approval, or what the value is individually. I can work the rest out.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you for your question. Would you mind if I went back to the offices and got you that information? Because obviously the test and trace payment is stopping. So it might be a useful exercise to do that over the whole course of the test and trace. That'd be good. Thank you.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor T. Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's for Councillor Virginia Gay, please, and it's on page 243, Councillor Gay, and it's the Pier Pavilion Theatre. I have a non-pecuniary interest, I suppose I should declare, since I'm trustee of the largest, the organisation that puts on the largest and most successful winter show in North Norfolk. But it says the current visitor numbers tickets booked are indicating excess of this 64% pre-COVID capacity. So I wanted to know what actually the numbers that were booked, but also 64% is actually quite a low figure when there are other shows across the whole of Norfolk that are actually sold out over Christmas. And given the amount of money that is poured into Cromer Pier or the North Sea, whatever way you want to look at it, those figures seem low, and perhaps is it maybe time to look at doing something else to actually get visitors' numbers to it, because 2/3 full is not really ideal, and other non-subsidised facilities do much better. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick. I was answering questions about this in overview and scrutiny not very long ago, and we're going to have a member presentation on this subject. In fact, the comparative data that we have shows that that figure is not bad. So it's the picture is not quite as bleak as you're painting it. In fact, the Open Wide itself is extremely pleased with these figures.
If I could just come back, I mean, yeah, thanks for that, but not bad. So I'd like to know what the actual figure is above 64%, but not bad when there are non-subsidised facilities that basically can sell virtually every ticket they have, and there's no cost to the taxpayer. And that's, I'm just saying, perhaps I'm sure Openreach will find it satisfactory because they're the beneficiaries. That's fine, but I'm just saying perhaps we should be looking at some other way so that we can actually, instead of pouring money in, we could maybe at least make it cost-free or bring something back out, because a good theatre, a good show, and there's plenty of them in London West End, they actually make money for people and we lose money, and I don't think that's. I'd just like to add, Councillor Fitzpatrick. In fact, until COVID, this company was returning money to the district. So there was in place a deal which was actually very advantageous to the district. So these figures have been affected by COVID, and obviously suggestions are always welcome, and that's what we will be discussing at the member presentation. Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at page 234, this is for Councillor Fredericks. They put down there a landowners event on the 16th of March. The housing strategy team will run a webinar for landowners, etc. It says that you sent 40+ invitations out. What's been the take up so far? I understand it's a pilot scheme. That's not an issue. But you know, the council does know how important it is for us, in my view, to provide low cost homes for local residents. And that is a perfectly genuine question. What's the take up so far?
Thank you, Councillor Pearce. The council's, the invitations only went out, I think it was this week, and we've got 9 so far from agents who are representing a number of landowners. So I'm hoping that we're going to get more. It's a pilot, so if this is successful, then we can roll it out a little bit further. But yeah, it's really important that people come forward with land, and this is why I've suggested this landowners event. So thank you so much for your question.
Thank you, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I too have a question for Councillor Gay. It refers to the Housing Support Fund. It's on page 240 of our papers. I'm puzzled at one sentence. It says allowed to take 10% off 128 in administration fee. Could I explain allowed to take 10%? Does that mean we are taking 10% of £128,000? If we are, if we're taking that amount or a lesser amount, is there a policy on what fee we take? And if we were to take a 10% fee,
would that be a lot of profit in it, or would that cover costs? So I'm just really puzzled about the fee, the charging structure, and the policy around the fee.
Thank you, Councillor Gay.
I believe that this is allowable under the policy, Councillor Fitzpatrick, and that it's not intended to make a profit, it's intended to pay for the provision of the service.
Could I come back and now say it's allowable under the policy? Could you explain and signpost the policy for me, please?
This is a special fund set up to support people, and what I'm saying is that a certain amount of that fund was allowed to be used for the administration of the fund for those who are working to do the provision.
Thank you, Councillor Gay. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Councillor Lloyd, if I may, on page 248. I note that by the end of March, you should have planned 60,900 trees that should have been planted. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being extremely confident and 1 not being confident at all, what figure would you give in terms of how confident you are that the remaining 49,100 trees will be planted by the end of April next year?
I'm as confident as I can be. I think I had a similar question to this at the last full council a couple of weeks ago, and I was hoping I'd explained that it is very much a moving target. We're in a lot of competition. There's a lot of people out there planting trees. So if I go back 6 months ago, we thought we'd met our target back then in terms of numbers of pledges that came in to plant trees. At the moment, we've got about 70,000 trees on our books that we hope to plant next season. So I'm hesitant to give you a 0 to 10 because you'll throw it back at me later if it does not there. But look, you know, I'm a pragmatist, and we have more than enough trees being pledged to us on our books at the moment to meet the target, and I think that's all I'm going to say. Thanks.
I look forward to seeing you plant some trees with us on Sunday, Councillor Cushing, to add to the target.
I've got a spade. I'm always doing it to help.
Good. We'll see you at the event. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just related to a question I think that Councillor Hayman raised earlier about the brown bins and replacement of brown bins. So I asked a question, sorry, it's to Councillor Lloyd, this question. I asked a question at overview and scrutiny as to what happens to the brown bins that we are replacing, in terms of obviously not wanting us to just dispose of those and get rid of them. So I think it might be just interesting if Councillor Lloyd has an update on that as to what happens to those bins we will be replacing, please.
Yeah, you'll be pleased to know that all the bins, we have an outlet for the bins, and the bins will be recycled. Yeah, we had a great offer from another member actually saying they'd make great wormeries. But no, we're going to recycle them, and actually the officers believe that people will be paying for these to be recycled for us, and won't make a lot of money, but it will not be a cost to the council anyway.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Spagner. Stenton, sorry.
Hello, thank you. I've got a question to something that was mentioned by Eric Seward in his report. I don't know if I heard it correctly, that some of the benefit queries are being outsourced by the council. Have I heard that correctly, please?
This is your answer.
Of course I can take this. Benefits have actually come in-house through the one front door policy. Revenues are aiming to come back in-house from June.
Okay. And if they're being outsourced, who is handling those inquiries and what's the cost of that, please?
Just wanted to check that was okay to say. Currently Civica have been taking our calls, and I believe that Councillor Seward actually detailed the cost of those per year in his speech.
Thank
Can I ask Councillor Stewart to confirm that?
Well, the cost of Civica, the advice we've been given by officers, we're talking about 72,000.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more questions? Lovely, good. Moving on to item 13, we've got no questions received from members, got no opposition business, no notices of motion. Don't need to exclude voting press and no private business. So thank you everybody for tonight.